On this channel I will talk about Aufklärung a lot. In fact, it's probably going to be the one word that I'm going to mention in every single video of mine. I call myself an Aufklärer. This is what this is all about. I want to aufklär you. And what exactly Aufklärung means is something I don't want to talk about in this video specifically. I want to make lectures about this in the future. Rather, in this video, I want to talk about why I use the word Aufklärung. That is something I don't have to justify over at my German channel because, well, it's a German word. Of course, when I talk German, I say Aufklärung. But when I'm talking English, why do I say Aufklärung? Why don't I say Enlightenment? Because that is how the word Aufklärung is usually translated into English. And I will admit that I myself am not fully happy with having to use the German word Aufklärung in English, especially since I know that most people will not immediately recognize it, will not immediately understand what I'm talking about or associate anything with this word. And I also understand that it might at first be a little awkward to use that word in English. But then again, that will probably change with time. I mean, languages take up words from other languages all the time. It's the same case with the word philosophy, after all. It's also not an English word, or in German, where we say Philosophie, it's not a German word. We took that from the Greeks. So why can't English take the word Aufklärung from the Germans? It has taken other words from German before, just like German has taken words from English. But the question you will probably ask is, yeah, fair, that can happen, but why should it happen in this case when we already have an English word? That is enlightenment. And, well, I am not happy with the word enlightenment. I don't think that it really encapsulates what I mean by Aufklärung. And it is for 3 reasons that I take issue with this word and I refuse to use it in place of Aufklärung. The first reason is simply the matter of it being potentially confusing in English. And that is because in English the word enlightenment actually has 2 meanings, while in German we have 2 different words for these 2 meanings. So when I talk about Aufklärung, I am talking about enlightenment in the sense of the age of enlightenment. So the 18th century, the age of reason, when thinkers like Kant lived. And I talk about Aufklärung the way he meant that word. Aufklärung as in using your reason, being rational, thinking for yourself, being free, being a rational, moral being. That is what in German is called Aufklärung. And what, again, the English translate as enlightenment. However, in English, by enlightenment, you can also mean spiritual enlightenment. So, in English, when I say enlightenment, people don't automatically have to think about Kant, they can also think about the Buddha. In English, when you say enlightenment, it can also mean reaching a higher plane of understanding, of understanding deeper truths that are beyond the understanding of the normal person. instead of the, well, in a sense more mundane, just being reasonable and thinking for yourself. And enlightenment in this second sense isn't called Aufklärung in German, it's called Erleuchtung. And actually the word Erleuchtung is closer to the literal meaning of the word enlightenment. Because leuchten in German means to light or to shine. So Erleuchtung means that light is coming over you. You were in the dark before, and suddenly something is erleuchtet. Another way to translate that into English would be illuminated. So when we say ein Raum ist hell erleuchtet, then we would say in English, the room is brightly illuminated. There are lights shining everywhere. So Erleuchtung is actually closer to the English word enlightenment. And well, in English there can be this confusion what you're talking about, and even when it's clear which kind of enlightenment you mean, I always get the sense that, and maybe I'm wrong because this is not my first language, I may not perceive the words exactly like a native speaker would, but in English, to me, it always sounds a bit presumptuous, a bit arrogant to call yourself enlightened. And it almost sounds like an insult to claim somebody else is thinking of themselves as enlightened. Maybe I just spent too much time on the internet, and maybe I was just exposed to the enlightened atheist meme too often. But that's how the word enlightenment is connotated for me in English. It makes me think of someone who believes to have higher understanding, higher knowledge, when that probably isn't the case. And that is how it would feel in German if someone called themselves erleuchtet. Like if someone was walking around and saying, ich bin erleuchtet, I am enlightened in this spiritual sense, it would also sound quite presumptuous. And if I said about somebody else, hält sich für erleuchtet, he believes himself to be enlightened in this spiritual sense, it would also be sort of an insult. But with Aufklärung, that is not the case, at least not to the same degree. It can also sound presumptuous, and it certainly often is, when someone calls himself aufklärt, or aufgeklärt in German, but certainly not to the same degree. So that's one reason why I dislike the English word, because it doesn't differentiate between these two very, very different things. The second reason is I simply don't think it's a very good translation. And maybe what I will explain now will sound very nitpicky because it's about fine nuances of the language, but Aufklärung is what I have dedicated my life to. I very deeply and very thoroughly and very radically have thought about Aufklärung for at least the last decade. And so those nuances matter to me. What does the word Aufklärung mean if we take it apart? It actually has three parts. Auf, klar or klär, and And I want to start with the last part. This is not in itself a word. It's an ending that you have uh, for many words, for many nouns in German. And it functions more or less like the English ing. So it denotes something being in progress. And I find that often, not just in the case of Aufklärung and Enlightenment, a verb ending in ung in German will end in ment in English. Not always, but there are certainly other cases. For example, the English word government. In German, it's Regierung. Now, regieren as a verb means to govern. So, in both languages, the verb gets a certain ending and becomes a noun. But in German, the ending denotes a progress. And I find that interesting and more fitting if you think about it. In English, when you say government, it sounds like it's this rigid, set in stone thing. Like there's the government, this body of people that sit somewhere and create laws or whatever they are doing. While in German, when you say die Regierung, a more literal translation would be the governing. So the Regierung is not just people sitting around and these people are then the government. No, the government is what these people are doing. It's the process of governing the country. It's an action that is undertaken, that is in progress. And while that might be a small nuance, I think from this you could arrive at different attitudes towards the government. When it's the government, when it's something that is, not that acts, it's more easy to feel alienated from it. To feel like, well, it's a bunch of people who sit on big chairs and look down on us. And also, it's more easy to feel like the government is disconnected from the country. Like they are sort of occupiers, foreign occupiers. And like you could remove the government if you wanted, and maybe you should because they suck. And the country itself would still be the same because they are just a bunch of people who took hold of these seats. While with the German word Regierung, it's more like die Regierung des Landes, the governing of the country, is the act that is constantly being undertaken. And even if the people, the specific people that undertake this act, the specific people that govern the country, the ministers and the chancellor, even if they change, the governing is still in process. So it's not so much about the people, they are just functionaries serving the country. And I find that quite more fitting. I'm not saying that this is really that Germans and English speaking people really feel that differently about their government. Actually, I think that the average German doesn't think one bit about the meaning of this ung ending. So for the average German, Regierung is just the same as government. It's just a bunch of people sitting around in big chairs. But as a philosopher, it is my job to take words more seriously, to use them more consciously and not mindlessly like the average person might do. And when I do that, I come to the conclusion that I like the German word better in this case. I think every language has better and worse words. There are also words in English that I like better, but when it comes to this ung ending, I usually prefer the German. Another example would be movement, which in German is Bewegung. And again, the verb bewegen means to move. But here especially I find it fitting that we call the noun Bewegung. So that wouldn't really be movement, it would be moving. Because, well, that's what it is, right? It is something that is in progress, that is in flow. When I'm lifting my arm, I'm not making a movement as if that was a steady and set thing. I am making a moving because I am literally moving my arm. The ending is also used in some words that don't have the ending meant in English. So, for example, the English word order in German means Ordnung. Again, the verb is ordnen, that is to order something, to put it into order. Not to order in the sense of command or demand, but to make it orderly and to organize it. And the noun in German, so the order, is called die Ordnung. So Ordnung is not just something stale, something dead, where things are just lying around orderly, neatly, but rather it is, if we take the word seriously, again, I'm not saying this is how the average German understands the word, it is something that is in progress. A side note, that was something that was very important for Fichte, for example. When he said in his philosophy that God has to be thought of as the moral world order, and that we don't need to think of God as a person who stands outside the moral world order and who is ordering, who is organizing the world morally, but that we should think of God as this order himself. Fichte was accused of atheism because he was denying God. But in fact, that was not what Fichte was doing. He was pointing out that the order itself is the thing or the person which is ordering the things. Order is not something set in stone, order is a progress, something that is happening at every moment. Well, if we come back to the word Aufklärung, that means that Aufklärung denotes a process, and I really like that, unlike the word enlightenment, because enlightenment sounds like you're done. Congratulations, you are enlightened. That's behind you. Maybe there was a time when you couldn't think for yourself, but now you can think for yourself. Now you are a rational person and you are done with that. And unfortunately, that is how many people think of Aufklärung. Also in German. Again, I don't want to overemphasize this as if the normal German speaker was thinking about it. They aren't. So we like to think of the Enlightenment as something that's behind us. It happened in the 18th century. It was certainly important because that's when we started using reason and doing science and all that neat stuff. But we have since learned that and moved on, and it has nothing more to teach us. That is very much wrong. And I believe everyone who thinks they are aufklärt, as in it's done, it's finished, shows by believing this that they are very, very far from being aufklärt. You can't ever be aufklärt. you can be more aufklärt than you were before or than someone else is, but you are never done with it. It's like being good, being moral. Certainly you can become more moral, but you never just become fully moral and fully holy. So that's why I prefer to say Aufklärung, because it shows that it's a process that's not done yet. If it was just about that, though, I could just say enlightening in English, right? So, what about the other two parts of the word? Well, the middle part, klar, comes from the adjective klar, which means clear. It's basically the same word as in English, has the same root. So something is clear. We can use that in the literal sense. So we can talk about a clear window. We can talk about clear water, which means, well, it's not dirty. It's not tarnished, but rather you can look through it because it's so clear. You can see things as they are. You can see the things on the ground. But we can also use the word clear in a less literal sense. We can say that a thought, an argument, a text, an idea is clear to us, meaning that we understand it. In fact, the German word for explain, to explain, is erklären, which means making something clear to someone. That's what I do when I explain something. So, Aufklärung is a clarification of thoughts. It makes things clear. And you might say, well, isn't that similar to enlightenment? Because enlightenment means there's light suddenly. And when there's light, things are more clear. You can see more clearly. Well, yes, but I think there is a slight difference, isn't there? Enlightenment, to me, sounds a lot like before it was dark. So you couldn't see a thing. It was pitch black. And now light appears, light comes over you, and now everything is perfectly visible. Well, that is not what Aufklärung is really about. It's not that when you are unaufklärt you see nothing. You do see things, and you see the same things that the aufklärt person sees. It is not spiritual enlightenment which opens a completely new plane of existence to you. You are not opening your third eye or something. You are just seeing the same things more clearly. And I think this is important to understand, because many people, when you say to them that they aren't aufklärt, they will disagree with you. They will probably get angry because you just said they aren't rational, they aren't thinking for themselves. And I think one reason they often get so angry and so violently disagree is because they simply don't understand what is being said. Because what they hear when you call them unaufklärt is, oh, he's saying I'm completely in the dark, but this can't be because I see things around me. yes, I'm not denying that you are seeing something. I'm not denying that there's some sort of light in your world. What I am denying is that you are seeing things clearly. I am denying that you are seeing things as they are. But if you believe that the difference is not between seeing things clearly and seeing them unclearly, but rather between seeing things and not seeing things at all, then you can easily delude yourself into believing, well, since I see something, no matter how unclear it is, I'm already aufklärt. And then you might not even realize that it is possible to see things more clearly than you do. Because you think it's just about seeing at all. And you don't realize there are different levels of seeing. I also feel like enlightenment makes it sound more like a passive thing. Like the light suddenly appeared, like the light came over you. And that makes people sound like they are victims. Like they, beforehand, it wasn't their fault that they didn't see, there simply was no light. And now they are seeing, but it's not their accomplishment either, because the light just appeared. So if there's someone else who still doesn't see, not their fault, because for them the light didn't appear yet. And to me it is very, very, very important to stress that people are never victims. They are not blameless. They have a responsibility, and that was what Kant, for example, talked about in his very famous essay on Aufklärung, saying that being unaufklärt is your own fault, your own responsibility of sorts. You are not the victim of not having been raised better or of having been manipulated or whatever. And you shouldn't wait for someone to liberate you, for some messiah or whatever to come along. No, it is on you. You can get help, of course. You are not entirely alone, but ultimately you yourself have to be responsible. And lastly, the first part of the word, auf, that just means up or open or on. And in combination with the word klar, so Aufklärung, or as a verb, aufklären, it's actually a weather metaphor. Because when the sky is all dark and gray, and then, for example, after a storm, after it rained, the clouds are moving away and the sun is coming out again and the sky is turning blue again, we can say in German, der Himmel klart auf. So that would literally mean the sky is clearing up. So the clouds are moving away and the light is coming through again. And again, I think that is a bit of a different metaphor than saying enlightening, because enlightening sounds more like you're going from total darkness to total light. But in this case, people on a cloudy day, they are not living in darkness, they are living in grayness. They can see things, but it's just not quite as bright, quite as clear, quite as sunny as when the clouds move away and the sky is clearing up. So that's my second reason for preferring the word Aufklärung to the word enlightenment. I simply think it's not the best possible translation. Maybe one could come up with a better translation. Maybe one should use a more literal translation like upclearing or whatever. I have talked about that in the past, but I feel as a non-native speaker, I am not fit to really come up with the best possible translation. Maybe native speakers can think about this. Maybe someone can suggest something to me. Um, but I think that's not my place. But moving on to my third and last reason why I dislike the word enlightenment. And that is that it is a translation at all. Even if it was the perfect translation, I would still feel uneasy with it, because the word Aufklärung is not something you should translate. It is something you should come up with by yourself. What do I mean by that, and why am I saying that? Well, here I have to say something which surely will be controversial. Aufklärung, unlike what you might believe or what you might have heard, what you might have been taught, Aufklärung was not a general European movement. Aufklärung was a German movement. I could be even more specific. I wouldn't really say it was a German movement either. Like there wasn't really something like a Bavarian Aufklärung. It was more of a northern German Protestant movement. So it happened in Prussia, it happened in Saxony, but not really in Bavaria or Austria. Now, I know people will disagree with me on that. And they will tell me, of course, there was Aufklärung in other countries. Of course, there were Aufklärers in other countries. Locke was an English Aufklärer. Voltaire was a French Aufklärer. There weren't just German Aufklärers like Kant. But you're only saying that because you don't really know what Aufklärung is. Which is fine, I don't blame you. It's not really talked anywhere. In fact, I see that as part of my mission to explain what Aufklärung is, what this specific thing, this specific movement that only really happened in Germany, what it is, and how it is different from things that happened in other countries. Because, of course, I'm not denying that there was a more general, more broad European movement. I'm not denying that in the 18th centuries, in various European countries, people talked about using reason. People questioned prejudices and superstition, and people criticized the church and the absolute monarchy. And I'm also not denying the importance of what happened in other countries, like France or like England. Rather, I'm very aware that the German movement of Aufklärung was in large part inspired by foreign thinkers, was in large part started by German thinkers going into dialogue with or reading thinkers from outside Germany. But what I'm saying is that in Germany they went beyond what happened in other countries, and they created something deeper, something more radical, and something different from what was going on in other countries. And maybe it's a bit suspicious when I, as a German, say something like that. Um, Even though I'm really the last person to have any sort of nationalism inside of me. Um, I mean, I'm an Aufklärer for God's sake, and I'm all about thinking for yourself. And I can think of few things that are more contrary to Aufklärung than hyping up the nation that you happen to be born in, just because you happen to be born there, and uh, being proud of your nation, or such silly notions, um, because apparently you can't just be proud yourself. You have to hide behind something else to be proud. Um, no, this is not said out of nationalism, but even so, in case I might be um, suspicious, I might point at Michel Foucault, who, after all, is one of the most important thinkers of the last century, and who was a Frenchman, not a German, and who still, 10 years before I was born, was already saying the same thing I'm saying here, who was saying that, well, the French or the English should maybe start to look more closely at what happened in Germany in the 18th century, and not just assume that it was basically the same thing that happened in their countries, and that they could learn something from what happened in Germany at the time, which they can't learn so easily from their own thinkers from that time. And for that very reason, Foucault, just like me, when holding a lecture on what is Aufklärung, what is criticism, didn't translate the German word, because just like me, he was of the belief that it was a very specific thing that can't so easily be translated. And, well, why did I say that Aufklärung is not something you should translate? Because even if we assume that it originated in Germany, and that it is only a German thing originally, couldn't you still, the moment you pick it up in another country, translate the word? Like the Germans also invented the printing press. Gutenberg invented the modern printing press. And still you don't use the German word Druckerpresse in all the other languages, but rather you came up with your own words, like printing press. Well, yes, you could do that with any other word but Aufklärung. Because, and here I'm basically saying what Foucault already said, Aufklärung is about critical thinking. That is what everyone more or less knows. However, people like to believe it is mainly about criticizing others. And that's why they think Aufklärung happened in all of Europe, because didn't French thinkers like Voltaire criticize the monarchy or the Catholic Church? He certainly did. He was very critical. Yes. But true Aufklärung is not about criticizing others. That is often quite easy to do, and that is often quite cheap. Rather, true Aufklärung is about criticizing yourself. For example, let's consider that in Germany, where actual Aufklärung happened, you had a thinker like Kant, who wrote the Critique of Pure Reason, and the Critique of Practical Reason, and the Critique of Judgment. And what was this whole critical project of Kant about? it was not about criticizing other philosophers. It was not about saying, well, Leibniz was wrong and Locke was wrong, and now here's a new theory that I can't present you and that one is right. Rather, Kant did something new that no one had previously done. He criticized reason itself. He criticized our understanding. He wanted to know what not is previous knowledge or alleged knowledge right or is it wrong, but rather what can we even know and where are the limits of our knowledge. So, in other words, he criticized himself, his own knowledge, his own ability to know. So when I say himself, I of course don't just mean himself as in this specific individual, Immanuel Kant, but rather the human being in general, because of course his criticism applies to not just Kant's own understanding, but all our understanding. But still, it was self-criticism, reason criticizing itself, reflecting on itself. And I think it was no coincidence that it was a German thinker who did that. Because in Germany, Aufklärung at the time had already started, had already gone on for a bit of time, and had talked the intellectuals of the time more and more to criticize themselves. And I could give more examples. I just mentioned Kant because that's the most prominent example. But what does that have to do with the word Aufklärung? Well, says Foucault, it is common for historical ages to only be named in retrospect. Antiquity didn't call itself antiquity. The ancient Greeks didn't call themselves the ancient Greeks. Of course they didn't, because in their own perspective they were the current Greeks and not the ancient Greeks. And likewise, the Middle Ages didn't call themselves the Middle Ages. Again, that wouldn't have made sense, because to them, they weren't in the middle, they were at the end of history so far as it had gone so far. Only in the Renaissance period did people look back and basically say, well, antiquity was kinda neat and we are also kinda neat, and this time in between it kinda sucked. We don't want to have anything to do with it anymore. What shall we call it? Whatever, let's just call it the Middle Ages. And Foucault points out that the Aufklärung, the age of Aufklärung in Germany, is pretty much the only period in history which gave itself its own name. So Kant himself said we live in an age of critique, of criticism. And Kant himself wrote an essay, what even is Aufklärung? And he didn't write that randomly, he wrote that because someone had posed that question publicly. People were already talking about that. Kant didn't come up with the term. People were already saying we are in an age of Aufklärung. And that, as Foucault points out, was quite unique. And as a side note, I might point out that our current age hasn't given itself its own name. I mean, if I ask you what time do you live in, you will probably tell me, well, in the present. And that's it. Presumably in 500 years, when historians write about our time, they will not call it the present, because to them their time will be the present. But what will they call it? Probably some name that they will choose, not that we have chosen. um, we don't really have a name for ourselves. I mean, I guess you sometimes hear something like this is post-modernity, but that doesn't really count, um, because you are not really defining yourself that way. Um, you are defining yourself through something else. You are just looking back and saying, well, the last age was the age of modernity, and now we are kind of different, so this is not modernity anymore, so we are now postmodern. Um, that doesn't count. Again, what matters to me when it comes to Aufklärung is that people aren't victims. People are active. People, in a way, create themselves. And that is what mattered to Foucault also. To him, it was so important that the Aufklärung called itself Aufklärung, because only by doing so did it become the Aufklärung. It's not just that they examined themselves and they found, well, we happen to be doing this thing that we now decide to call Aufklärung, so therefore we are the age of Aufklärung. But rather, they said, we want to do this thing. We choose to be the age of Aufklärung. We do Aufklärung, and therefore we are the age of Aufklärung. By defining yourself, determining yourself, you are making yourself into that which you want to be. And that is something that happens specifically in Germany. Because this English word enlightenment, unlike the German word Aufklärung, was not used in that sense at the time. So if someone wants to tell me, oh, there were English Aufklärers, Locke was an English Aufklärer, well, Locke didn't talk about enlightenment, so Locke didn't consider himself an enlightener. Rather, only later, a few decades after the age of Aufklärung, in the 19th century, when the English looked over to Germany and looked at what had happened in Germany in the past decades intellectually, when they engaged with German thought of the time, they translated this German word Aufklärung as enlightenment. And then, looking back, they said, and that was superficial, if you ask me, that was done too quickly. They said, well, we had that too. We had the same thing, Locke or Hume or whoever. They were our enlighteners, so to say. Well, I disagree with that. I say, if you had been doing the same thing, you would have had come up with a name for it at the time. The very fact that you didn't at the time invent a name for it, shows that you also didn't do the thing. And that is my third reason why I dislike just saying enlightenment. It sort of negates what happened here in Germany. It sort of negates the specialness and singularity of this Aufklärung, and that is dangerous. Something is lost by that, because then you don't have to look specifically at these German Aufklärers, because you don't believe they did anything differently than someone like Locke or Voltaire or whoever. And that is also a reason why I don't believe in me as a German Aufklärer simply coming up with a better translation. Maybe I could think of something. Maybe I could say Aufklärung, and maybe that is better than saying enlightenment. But then the translation itself would be better as a translation, but it would still be a translation. It would still be something foreign coming from outside to a place, to a culture which hasn't really created it by itself. So rather, I will keep using the word Aufklärung, even when speaking another language. And hopefully, Aufklärung will spread to other parts of the world, to the English-speaking world. And hopefully Aufklärung will spread to Germany, because I'm not saying that just because it happened in Germany, the German people are somehow more aufklärt. No, believe me, I wish that was true. I wish I was living in a country surrounded by aufklärt people, but it's certainly not the case. The average German certainly has no right to claim Aufklärers like Kant or like Fichte or like Nietzsche, simply because they happen to come from the same country. Again, I'm not a nationalist. That would be such a silly notion, to think you have any claim to the thoughts of a person simply because he was born somewhat broadly in the same area as you or spoke the same language as you. So hopefully Aufklärung will spread, and when it does, maybe an English-speaking Aufklärer will by themselves come up with a proper English word for it. And when that happens, I will be very happy to use it. But so far, to my knowledge, it hasn't happened. And until then, I will keep using the word Aufklärung. And I hope that with this lecture, I have made clear why that is. As for what exactly I understand by that word, I have said, okay, it's about thinking for yourself, about being rational, about being critical, and most importantly, being self-critical. But what I understand by that more specifically, that is a topic for other lectures. That is something I want to talk about in length in the future. But here I just wanted to clear up why I refuse to use the English word enlightenment and why I insist on the German word Aufklärung, and why I believe those two don't mean the exact same thing.